let me tell you a story. We're going back 12 years till July 2013. I'd just come back from my greatest assignment ever, which was watching Andy Murray win Wimbledon for the first time. And I got back into the office on a couple of days after the final, and the phone goes and it was Walter Smith. There wasn't anything too unusual about that, but what was to follow was one of the most extraordinary events that I can recall in my whole time in journalism. Walter wanted to meet me. He said we couldn't meet near Ibrox. He was the chairman of Rangers at the time. Charles Green was the chief exec and owner. Anyway, I went over to meet Walter, whose grandson was playing on the AstroTurf pitch across from the front of Ibrox. I had to park round some side alley, saw his Range Rover. Walter came out, opens the door, I get into the passenger seat. Walter's got a mobile phone in his hand, goes into his glove compartment, pulls out a second mobile phone and says, "You know what I think of guys that have got two mobile phones, don't you?" I says, "Well, probably not to be trusted, Walter." He says, "Yes, that's my rule." He says, "Anyway, I'm that guy, I've got two mobile phones." Long story short, he felt that his phone that he usually used was being listened to. This was at the height of a lot of shenanigans. And the whole basis of the conversation was Walter asked me to reach out. He said, "I need you to reach out to Paul Murray." He said, "I don't know if this football club is going to survive." Paul had tried on various occasions to get control, and had kind of got sick of the whole issue. But Walter said, "You need to ask him. He needs to try again, because if he doesn't, then I don't know if Rangers survive." And that's why today in the studio we have none other than Paul. Well, it's not only why Paul, because, you know, very recently, over the last few months, probably the last half a year or so, you've been involved in facilitating the American takeover, Andrew Kavanagh, this whole new era for Rangers. It kind of begs the question, do you do anything else but try and save Rangers?
Well, I mean, well, thank you for the intro, but no, I mean, obviously there's a lot of people who were involved in, if you want to call it, saving Rangers over the years that we'll talk about, and I was part of that, but only part. So there's a lot of people who were part of that, so we'll talk about that, obviously, no doubt, during the course of the next 45 minutes or so.
But the reason that I started with that sort of intro, that was quite a moment for me, Paul. You know, and Walter was clearly quite unnerved by various things that were going on in the background, and the fact that this guy, the greatest manager that Rangers have had in certainly modern years, guy with a statue outside the ground, and when he felt the club was in a moment of serious peril, it was you that he wanted to reach out to. I mean, that's quite a moment for anybody, I would have thought.
Yeah, well, obviously, I mean, like any Rangers fan, and first and foremost my fan, I mean, obviously hold Walter in the greatest regard. I mean, he is, well, certainly I was never around with the likes of Bill Struth and these guys, but, you know, my heroes, John Gregg, Walter Smith, you know, those are guys that I would hold in the highest regard. So obviously, the fact he's saying that to you is obviously something I take a lot of pride in. I mean, at the time, I didn't feel a lot of pride, because obviously we were in the midst of a really difficult situation. I mean, that whole period from the Craig Whyte takeover, you know, through to 2015, when we were lucky to be, well, not lucky, but we were successful in terms of getting control of the club again, myself, Dave King, John Gilligan, and a whole cast of other people who we'll talk about. A really, really tough time. Yeah, I mean, but the fact that Walter said that to you, obviously that's great.
But that was the moment that started it, because you had tried in various guises, the Blue Knights, this and that, over the years, the whole Craig Whyte fiasco, and you'd got to a point where I think you felt you'd kind of exhausted all avenues. But that on that day when we had that conversation, and I told you, I relayed to you the conversation I'd had with Walter, that was the day you sort of relaunched, and that was the one that ended with the success of yourself, Dave King, and John Gilligan going in through those, albeit it was 18 months later.
Yeah, I think it was. I mean, there was a couple of key things that led to that. But I think people, well, I would think people would realise that these things are really time-consuming things to do, and they're also quite emotional as well, because if you're a fan, you're not just doing it from a business point of view, like any business transaction. You've also got the emotional attachment as well. So it does take its toll. And, you know, I mean, thinking back to when Craig Whyte bought the club, and then, you know, the period with Charles Green, and then the first attempt in 2013 to try and change the board, that was unsuccessful. But that was I mean, that was probably about 6 months of pretty intensive work before we got to that EGM in December 13. And, you know, when you try and you're not successful, it does take its toll, obviously. And I just kind of thought, and also I think people are a bit fed up hearing from you. You're constantly saying the same thing. So it probably needed an extra thing to happen, and also a different voice. And I think the big thing that happened was probably January 2014. Sorry, January 2015, when you know, Dave King and the so-called Three Bears, you know, bought a stake in the club, and I think that gave us the launch pad to then be able to then obviously, you know, request the EGM, which took place in March 2015, and then we were successful. But we basically had at that point, I think in total, you know, 35% of the shares. So that was a good launch pad to do that. So, you know, I think the second time was, you know, I think we actually learned a lot of we learned from the mistakes we'd made in 2013, and obviously determined not to repeat those mistakes in 2015. So yeah, that was probably what happened.
And yet, you know, when you think back, it seems like a lifetime ago now. And when you consider everything that was going on around Rangers, the financial collapse, the sale to Craig Whyte in the first instance, all that stuff, and here they are in, you know, 2025, new American owners. It's hard even to get your head around the kind of length of the journey, but where they are right now. I mean, and you must take, I'm guessing, a bit of satisfaction from the fact that, you know, from where it was, where it was rescued, to where it now is, and the potential for what lies in store under Andrew Kavanagh and these guys. Yeah,
it's exciting times now. I think it's worth saying. I mean, I think I said actually, obviously I think it was the 6th of March 2015, we had the EGM at Ibrox Stadium. You know, probably out with the birth of my children. It was probably one of the happiest days of my life when we got control that day. I remember how emotional it was. That was a Friday, and then the following day we played Cowdenbeath at Central Park, and that brought everything back to stark reality. And what people forget is that, because obviously we were trailing Hearts by quite a long way in the Championship at that point in time, Hearts had beaten Cowdenbeath 10-0 the previous Saturday. We played Cowdenbeath on the 7th of March, it must have been. We drew nothing each, and without being critical of any of the players and the management, it was probably one of the. I mean, I remember following Rangers in the early 80s, which was a tough time for the club, you know, but that was probably a low point from a playing point of view. And I remember there's quite a few very funny anecdotes, because obviously Donald Finlay was the chairman of Cowdenbeath. He was part of that kind of quite a strange day.
Yeah, half and a half scarf on.
And then all we've talked before about all the stock cars coming into Central Park for the stock car. It was just totally surreal. But I think the point being is it showed you just where the club was. And I think I said, we did a lot of interviews that day, different media outlets, and I said that day, and you know, you're a bit emotionally charged, and you're saying things maybe, you know, you obviously believe them, but you're kind of a little bit emotionally driven. I said at that point, I'm pretty sure if you look back at those interviews, I said it would take the club 10 years to recover. And we're now here 10 years later. Now, when I said that, I said it because, first of all, the club was broken. I mean, literally broken. And, you know, obviously I've been on the board, what would have been 4 years previous when Sir David was there, and it was just a completely different club. I mean, and Dave King had been on the board as well. It was completely different.
By the time you get in, it's hollowed out.
It was completely broken. And I think the other thing you've got to say is that, you know, you're also up against the Celtic team, which is very strong both on and off the pitch. So that was also the challenge. And I think it's worth saying, I mean, and I was only part of it, a small part of it, but, you know, I think it is worth saying, we're going to talk about the American ownership, and that's a really exciting thing, obviously, but I think it's really worth saying, and it's worth pausing just for a second. I think all the fans who watch this, what I'd say to them is, I think, although there have been mistakes made over the last 10 years, and I was part of that, you know, I made mistakes as well, you know, I think the club, the fans owe a huge gratitude to people like Dave King, Douglas Park, John Bennett, George Letham, George Taylor, Barry Scott and others who put in an enormous amount of time, but also money. I mean, they put in over £100 million over 10 years. And, okay, there's been mistakes. We all know that. Managers, players, but that's football. There's no guarantees in football. But those guys deserve a lot of credit. And, and I think that's an important point just to maybe start because, the trouble with football is it's one of these indices where everyone's critical of everything and everyone's a genius with hindsight and all the rest of it. But I think those guys deserve enormous credit. I was there for the first 3 years, but, and actually, despite the fact, as I said before, you're up against arguably, the strongest Celtic outfit in the widest sense, financially, on the pitch as well. I think to win a league championship and to get to a European final in those 10 years, bear in mind I said it would take 10 years to recover.
A transitional 10-year period.
Yeah, I actually think that's an achievement. I think people forget that sometimes, and I'm a fan. I'm critical as well, but it's just worth. Just put it into context. I think that is an achievement. So I think is an important backdrop just to then talk about the future, which obviously is really exciting and all the rest of it.
When you actually see, when you just think back to those times, you obviously lived it, Paul, but how did that happen? You just look at Rangers, European finals, Champions League, they've won the title since. How on earth did that happen? It just seems mad.
I think the whole thing, and Daniel, obviously, we asked the viewers to send in some questions, which we can come to.
Yep.
But I think, when you look back at the whole episode, and I know we don't want to dwell too much on past events, but you can't actually address the present and the future without kind of nodding to historical events. And, this whole thing comes to pass. And it is a kind of nod to the present as well, because David Murray's just released his autobiography, his memoirs from the time. And obviously, Paul, you were one of the guys, again, one of the moments. I remember, the Daily Record introduced Craig Whyte to the world. When our editor came to us and said, this guy's going to buy Rangers, knew nothing about him, and his PR people came to us and he was presented, and it's a mea culpa moment for which I'll never stop apologising, but we presented this guy as a bona fide guy, loads of wealth and all that. And that's when me and you first meet, because it's only a couple of days after that, I think, that we speak for the first time, and you raise concerns to me about whether or not this guy's genuine. Is this the real deal? Was this a potentially catastrophic event for Rangers? And we spent, I think, the next 6 months trying to get messages out there, because there's part of the misconception is that the Daily Record ran Craig Whyte to buy Rangers on the Monday and he bought it on the Tuesday. That's not the case. There was a 6-month period in between where you did so much work, Paul, to try and raise flags and warn people that there was the potential for a catastrophic event here. To the point, and you can pick up the story, that, before the takeover was finally concluded, you went to Charlotte Square to meet David Murray and basically plead with him not to sign the deal.
Well, we've actually, Keith mentioned that we've got some questions we put out on our social media channels, and some Rangers fans have written in with questions, and just to maybe jump in with this one. John wants to know, is it true that you offered David Murray a deal to buy Rangers to stop him from selling to Craig Whyte?
Yeah. With every of these things, it's a bit more complicated, obviously, than just a simple answer. I will answer the question, but so just to put it into context, we're going back, so I first joined the Rangers. So I've been involved in Rangers, obviously a fan, but I've been involved in the inside of Rangers for 20 odd years, and I joined the main board in 2007, and of course the club was sold in 2011. And there was two distinct periods. So the first 2 years I joined, so 2007 to 2009. David was chairman, his businesses were going really well, the world was great, and then suddenly in 2008, and it wasn't David Murray's fault, suddenly we had a full-scale global financial crisis, collapse of banks. I mean, who would ever have thought, Bank of Scotland, Royal Bank of Scotland would basically be within hours of running out of money. I mean, it was that serious. Yeah. So David was obviously caught up in all of that with his businesses. The Bank of Scotland had been a massive supporter of David, Rangers, and indeed Scottish football. I think at one point it was the Bank of Scotland Premier League, if it was called at the time. So that's a major event, and so then the second half of my first period, so 2009, 2011, Alistair Johnston took over as chairman, And, to be honest with you, we were just fighting the bank, just trying to keep the thing at bay with a great manager in Walter Smith. And there's no way we'd have won those championships and kept the thing going if it hadn't been for Walter and his genius. And Ali was there, obviously, as well, and Kenny and Ian Durant, etc. And I think we won 3 championships in a row. So it's quite a remarkable achievement, that. But then, of course, the bank were obviously in full, wanting their money back mode, and that's what happened. And the problem was that we had this obviously contingent tax liability which sat there, and I know a lot of people, maybe not Rangers fans, let's call it non-Rangers fans, talk about tax evasion and all that. It wasn't tax evasion; it was tax avoidance, and there was thousands of companies in the UK doing the same thing, including teams like Arsenal. I think even Celtic had a few EBTs as well. So it's not factually accurate to say it was tax evasion. And we took advice and all the rest of it. Unfortunately, it went to the highest court in the land, which used to be called the House of Lords, now it's called the Supreme Court, and they ruled against it. And these things happen. And unfortunately, Rangers were going to be the party that HMRC went after. So if you think about it, it's a bit like buying a house. If you're trying to buy a house and there's subsidence or a structural issue, you're not going to buy the house. You're going to buy it for nothing. So that was the problem we had. So on one hand, we had to find funding from somewhere else, and on the other hand, we had this huge contingent tax liability. So there was no way that any sane businessman is going to buy the club, because we had this effectively poison pill.
Step forward, Craig Whyte.
Well, and then he stepped forward, and it wasn't Craig Whyte's fault that we had the liability. He just saw the opportunity. And so what I said to David, it wasn't just me and the board. All of us had concerns about Craig Whyte. I mean, you only didn't have to look too far to be concerned about it. And it just got to the point. I kind of thought it might, because the previous year there'd been a guy called, I think it was Andrew Arrow, I think his name was, another guy stepped forward who actually, bizarrely, it turned out had connections to Craig Whyte as well. So he tried and he hadn't done it. So I actually thought, when I first heard about Craig Whyte it was probably December 2010, so 6 months before he bought the club, I thought we'd just peter out. I thought he would look at the thing and then say, there's this tax liability, I'm not doing this. Then when it got quite serious and got to March, April, he's going, and David's saying to the board, this guy's going to buy the club. I thought, this is not right, So it wasn't just me, but I went to see David, and what I said to him is, look, maybe we can raise money from somewhere else, but to do that, we have to do 2 things. We have to keep the Bank of Scotland facility in place to give us a bit of time, because it was £18 million. Give us a bit of time to stabilise the finances, find another bank to take out. Well, you understand they want out, but it gives a bit of time to get them out. And then the second most important thing is somebody else is going to have to take care of the liability, because no sane person's going to invest in the club if there's at that point, I think it was a £75 million.
It could have been anything, couldn't it?
Well, at one point it was 150. So and David, he just said, I can't do that, and that was it. And in fact, I think that was the last time I actually met David Murray. So that was 14 years ago. I left his office, and without being, we're all geniuses with hindsight. And I think, again, if you look at your newspaper, the week that Craig Whyte bought the club, which was, I think it was early May 2011, I said that it would lead to administration within 12 months.
No.
And unfortunately, it did. And it wasn't me being a genius. It was just obvious what was going to happen.
Well, on that as well, we've got a question in from Steve. He says, can you remember the exact point when you realised Craig Whyte wasn't all he was cracked up to be? And just on that, I said to Keith before we come on air that I can distinctly remember watching the news when he first was unveiled as Rangers' new owner, and my granddad turned to me and went, he's a chancer, he's at it. And I went, how do you know that? And he went, he doesn't wear a belt with his suit. And I went, right, okay.
The funny thing is, so I think I met Craig Whyte face to face, or I was in his company, I'm going to say maybe 4 times, I can't remember exactly, but the first time I met him was, I think it was the end of March 2011, so just before he bought the club on I think I'm going to say the 6th of May, so it was maybe 6 weeks before he bought the club. So basically, Arthur Johnson had got David Murray's agreement for us to sit and basically the board to meet Craig Whyte. So I went to a lawyer's office not far from here in Glasgow, and on one side of the table you had, from memory, John McClelland, Martin Bain, John Gregg, myself, can't remember who else on the board at the time, and one guy on the other side, Craig Whyte. And he was actually quite a nice guy. I mean, he wasn't an unpleasant guy. So each of us had a bit of a slot to ask him questions. That was the purpose of the call, get some comfort. And of course, we're all asking different questions. John McClellan's asking questions about this. John Gregg's asking questions about players. He's a football guy. Martin's asking questions about something else. So it came to me and I said to him, look, we're roughly the same age, Craig. We've both been involved in financial services. I've worked in London. You've worked in London. Do you know the following people? And London's a small place, a massive city, obviously, but it's a small place when it comes to expat Scots in financial services. The banks, it's just it's hard to explain. It's just quite a kind of niche thing. So I rhymed off 4 or 5 names, and he's like, I don't really know those guys, Paul. And so I was thinking, that's a bit of a red flag. And I said to him, okay, you don't know those guys, that's fine. I said, just talk me through some of the deals you've done. And, I've been involved in investment. I've made good investments, bad investment, average investment. I can talk about investment. I can talk to companies. I can point to companies. He starts going, well, I've not really been involved in investment. I've been involved. It was all just, very, very vague. So I just thought, there's no way this is right, And that was probably that meeting, which was 6 weeks before. Well, I mean, concerns before that, but after that meeting, I remember we all went into kind of ante room after, and we all just looked at each other and thought, this is not good. And then 6 weeks later, he bought the club.
And then there was, of course, the plastic pointy shoes, which didn't help.
Yeah, that was
the trappings of wealth were not apparent.
Yeah, it was that was certainly a concern.
Other questions we've got. Paul, this one from Graham says, what were your initial thoughts on Charles Green?
Do you know what? You might be surprised to hear this. I never actually met Charles Green.
Oh, wow, okay.
Which is actually quite incredible. We had constant battles in the press, and he was calling me this and I was calling him that. I never actually met him.
Oh, okay. From afar then, maybe, what was your thoughts?
Well, I mean, obviously, we all thought at the time, well, I've told the story before, which is probably boring now, but so I was working with Brian Kennedy and Douglas Park was involved, John Bennett.
This was attempt number 2, really, to buy.
Well, it was, yeah. This is when the club went into administration, and you've obviously heard of Duff and Phelps, so they were running the process, So long story short, I kind of met up with a guy called Brian Kennedy, who's now a good friend of mine, who I really respect, very good businessman, really interested in sport. He's not a Rangers guy, he comes from a Rangers family. And he's big pal with Graham Souness, etc. So Brian tried to put it together, and Douglas was involved at the time, and John Bennett, and we were trying to work with Duff and Phelps. And what was obvious at the time was that, well, it appeared to me certainly that Craig Whyte was pulling the strings behind the scenes, albeit he was meant to have gone. And again, cut a very long story short. I mean, nobody in the whole process. Everyone in the whole process was made public. Bill Miller, this guy, that guy, and then the guy that Bill Nigg, a selection of guys, and then the guy who bought the club or bought the assets, who appeared at the last minute, who was never publicly, mentioned, was Charles Green. So literally, the night before, again, I think bizarrely, it might have even been the same day. I think it was 6th of May, a year later. He's announced as the buyer. The night before, Brian Kennedy's told to fly to Glasgow to do the deal. He does that.
Brian Kennedy's in New York, and he gets his private jet fueled up. That's right.
Well, even before that? So no, I don't want to get into. This is obviously history, so I want to talk about the future, but just very briefly, because it is quite there's so many stories you could tell about that time. So basically, what happened is that the week before Charles Green bought the club, Brian Kennedy phoned me up and said, I'm going to fly to Inverness to Craig's castle, and I'm going to meet Craig, and I'm going to try and do this deal. And Craig Whyte said to him, Brian, I want to do a deal with you. I've got one condition. I don't want Paul Murray involved. And Brian said to me, what do you think? I said, well, obviously, if that's the only condition, do the deal. I'm happy to step aside because I believe in you, Brian, and that's more important than this. Brian had that agreement, albeit verbally, it wasn't a legal agreement. He flies to New York, does his business that week, and he's flying back on the Thursday night from New York. He gets a phone call from, I can't remember, it was Clark or White House, one of the guys, one of the administrators, and he says to him, I'm flying back. Where do I fly to? Do I fly to Manchester, where he lives, or do I fly to Glasgow to do this deal? They say, fly to Glasgow to do this deal. I pick him up from the airport on a Friday morning. We're driving into Ibrox, his phone goes. He goes, yep, okay, yep. He goes, just sold it to a guy called Charles Green. We're like, who's Charles Green?
That's mad.
Crazy.
That's crazy.
The whole period was crazy.
Just bizarre, eh?
And that's, you know, I know, Paul, we're dwelling on the past here, but I think the whole point of that, to cross that sort of ground, is to get to where it is all now. And, you know, the part that you've played over the last 12 months now, helping to facilitate and piece together Andrew Kavanagh, the 49ers, that I know because we speak. In fact, the only period that we didn't speak was when I was frantically trying to find out if this was true or not, and you wouldn't answer your phone for about 3 weeks, very unhelpfully. But I do know from speaking to you since then, obviously, an amount of pride, satisfaction, excitement about where the club is now and what the future might hold under these guys, and you got to know them.
And there were several fans as well, I should say, asking, just as a Rangers fan, how excited are you for the future?
Oh, hugely excited. I mean, you know, as I said before, I do think there should be a bit of a pause. You know, not to go back to the past, but a bit of a pause, and I think recognition for the guys that I've mentioned who did a lot of the hard yards. You know, the Dave, Douglas, John Bennett, the people I mentioned. I think that's important. In terms of the future, yeah. I mean, look, I've been involved in football enough on the business side and the club side to know, you know, there's no guarantees. I mean, football is a classic example of, I mean, you can be the brightest businessman in the world and you just need a bad deflection or a bad injury or a bad transfer. It's a difficult business. And that's why, you know, sport tends to go in cycles, because you get the rub of the green for a while and then you know, and then you don't. So there's no guarantees, but I'm kind of hugely excited. I mean, I don't know Parag as well, at a couple of meetings with Parag, but I know I spent a good bit of time with Andrew, certainly in the early days, and you know, I think these guys are going to be great for the club. I think in a funny kind of way, the fact that they're not Rangers fans is a good thing, because, you know, we've had Rangers fans on the board
Too emotionally invested
for a long time, and it is difficult. It's hard to convey when you are a fan, but you're also on the board as a, you know, custodian, or you're responsible. You feel the weight of expectation on your shoulders. Yeah. And in fact, my very last game as a director of Rangers was just before Steven Gerrard came, when we lost 5-0 at Parkhead and Celtic won the league. And I remember leaving that day, and I was actually finished. I just had to resign because I was just emotionally spent, because you sit there as a fan and a director, and it's hard to take it. So I think the fact that these guys are, you know, they're going to be, they're clearly going to be invested in the club from an emotional point of view, but they're a bit detached. So it gives them, you know, objectivity, and I think it's a good thing. And I think, as I say, I don't know Parag as well as Andrew, but I think they're quite a complementary duo, because, and it's maybe this East Coast, West Coast thing, you know. Andrew's obviously from Philadelphia. Parag, I think, is from California, certainly obviously San Francisco now. So I think that kind of slightly different style and background, but I think they're quite complementary.
Mm-hmm.
So talk us through, Paul, the involvement, how it came to pass, how, you know, and at what point did you realise, wow, this is big?
So I met Andrew for the first time on a Zoom call just at the end of October last year, so that's about, 7 months ago, or more than that now, actually, 9 months ago. And we had a bit of a chat, nice guy. He was then coming to London about a week later, so I flew down to London and had lunch with him in central London. A really good chat. He was actually he didn't actually mention the 49ers at that point in time, but he was actually with a guy from Leeds. So I kind of figured out that there was something else, you know, maybe going on, but he didn't actually mention the 49ers as, you know, at that point in time. And yeah, we had a really good chat. I mean, my first impressions were, first of all, really nice guy, very easy to talk to, and, you know, as we've been discussing, you know, over the last 20 years, I've met a lot of people who want to invest in Rangers and come forward, and I think we all know some of the people that we've just been mentioning. So Andrew was different. You know, you just get a sense immediately this guy is well, first of all, very successful businessman in his own right, very serious guy, but also a nice guy and also engaged. You know, I talked him through the history of the club. You know, we talked him through the last 15 years, some of the things that happened. And you could tell he was really engaged. And he obviously knew a lot of the things we're talking about. As it happened, because the guy that was there from Leeds, I did take the opportunity of mentioning the Battle of Britain 30 years ago, which they were quite amused by. I said, look, that shows you where Rangers were 30 years ago. Before the English Premier League came into existence, we were, if not the biggest club in Britain, certainly one of the biggest clubs in Britain.
As big as anyone, eh?
Big as anyone. And unfortunately, you know, all the money came into the EPL. So they were quite interested in that. And I think the two things that really struck me about Andrew that day, so that was early November, were, you know, first of all, he was really engaged in what I was saying. You know, he was obviously really interested. He actually, so that was a Friday. It was a Friday with lunch, and we were playing Hearts on the Sunday at Ibrox, and he actually said to me, I think I'll just fly up to Ibrox and go to the game. I was like, okay. So I said, well, do you want to try and speak to somebody? He said, no, I'll just get a ticket and I'll just go. And okay, and now, as it turned out, he didn't go for various reasons, some family stuff on. But he then contacted me about a week later and said, I want to come to the Dundee United game, which was in middle of November. And I said, again, do you want to help? And I said, no, I'll just go and get a ticket, a normal ticket, just any bit. I think he went into the Copeland stand, I think, actually. I thought it was quite interesting that you guy have, you know, that wealth, and he just thought, I'm going to buy a ticket. And so he flew up to Glasgow. He got a ticket on his own. He went with a couple of other guys. And you might remember that was a really bizarre game because it was actually a 3 o'clock kickoff on the Saturday. And it was really bad weather. It was middle of November, but it was snowdrifts and crazy weather, to the point that Dundee United couldn't get down the A9.
That's right. Aye.
So the game, he actually contacted me saying, when's the game start? So I've just looked at it, and apparently it's been delayed till 4 o'clock. So I've never known that. A game was delayed by an hour to 4 o'clock. So it was a really weird day. And Andrew was basically, you know, walking about the stadium, looking at the stands, looking at the...
Nobody's got a clue.
And nobody knew who he was. So I thought it was actually really interesting that a guy like that would take the time, because normally these guys want, you know, let's go to the director's box and VIP. This guy was prepared to put on, you know, just his kind of work clothes, if you like, and just go in and look at it. And another thing that happened that day, you might remember, there was quite a lot of fan protests as well, because it was the start of there was a bit of a, you know, the fan stuff was going on. So not only has he got to contend with, you know, snowdrifts, but I thought it was quite interesting.
Yeah.
You know?
It didn't put him off.
Well, obviously not. Obviously not.
And it felt like towards the end of the last season, even before the deal was done, he felt like he was there every week. Maybe he was at Celtic Park and he was at all the European games as well.
He is present a lot, isn't he?
Yeah,
I mean,
yeah.
I think that's a good sign, I think, for Rangers supporters, that he's not one of these stay away guys, you know. He actually wants to have a boots on the ground approach to running it. Is that something that you're happy with, or would it be better for him to put a bit of distance, because you know how hot it can get him?
Yeah, I think a bit of distance is not a bad thing. I mean, I think, and I think he said it. I'm not party to what they're going to be doing going forward, but you know, obviously you've got Parag and Andrew on the board, but they've appointed, obviously, and they put other people on the board as well. But they've just appointed a new chief executive, and other guys. So you have to let the executives run the club, Patrick Stewart and so on, and his team. So I think what they'll do, like any other business, they'll let those guys run the business, obviously reporting to the board. So I actually think a bit of distance. Come back to what I said before. I think it's not a bad thing that they're not Rangers fans who are here all the time with the pressure and the expectations, and you know. So I think having a bit of distance and a bit of perspective, to me, is not a bad thing.
What is it you think, or what did Andrew say to you in your discussions that made you think, yep, he's absolutely the guy? What did he outline to you, what his vision is, or what his plan is, or what his ambition is for Rangers, that made you go along with it? Or was it just him as a guy that was the kind of seal on the deal? Yeah,
well, I think he's, you know, you've heard him speaking. He's quite a kind of measured and considered guy, and I quite like that. He's not like I don't know him that well. I mean, I only met him a few times, but you know, I think in the dealings I had with him, which were quite a few, I think he's a considered, measured guy who's obviously been very successful in business, and he's not going to be prone to. I think the danger in football is you get prone to those, kind of hyperbole. Like we're going to go and spend 100 million and win the Champions League in 10 minutes, So I think we've got to be realistic and just let these guys take their time, look at the situation, and actually just build it going forward. And I think to answer your question, you got to spend some time with the guy. You realise he's a very, he's a serious guy. And I think also, it was quite clear to me. I actually messaged him. So we had lunch, and I was then getting back to the airport, and I sent him a message just saying, really enjoyed meeting you, etc. I said, I actually think you and your colleagues. I didn't actually know that. I'd suspected because the Leeds guy was. I didn't know at that time that he kind of alluded to, his sporting partner, and that was obviously the 49ers. He didn't say that at the meeting, but I kind of guessed that. I just said, you and your colleagues or associates. I said, I just really feel, having met you, and that was just after the first meeting, lunch. I said, I really feel you'd be great owners for the club. You just kind of felt, I've met tons of people over the years come forward, and all the people were mentioned. He just knew with the guy, this is a different sort of animal, and I think, obviously he was, keen to buy a football club. One of the things that was quite interesting, actually, when we were talking about the history, I took him through the history. He was, what became clear is I made the mistake you always do, Americans, about talking about soccer. And he quickly said, look, Paul, that's not, I don't call it, it's football. Why are you calling it soccer? I'm sorry. So he actually quickly, corrected me, and then began to tell me, he said, look, I've been to 5 World Cups with the US, watching World Cups, and his English team is Arsenal. And I said, well, that's quite interesting. I said, because I don't know if you know about it, but there's actually quite a long history between Rangers and Arsenal. And I sent him a link to a thing. I said, actually, you won't believe this, but Rangers actually rescued Arsenal.
The share thing,
back in the 30s. Then we began talking about the shares, and of course that was one of the things that obviously Craig Whyte obviously dealt with, inverted commas. So I think you're dealing with I've got an expression about proper people. You're dealing with a proper guy, and Parag's, I don't know Parag as well, but I think he's the same. So that was my sense after the first meeting.
And you then fix up a meeting between Andrew and Dave King, and from there the business deal snowballs, and we get to where we are. Yeah,
well, obviously, I'd known for a number of years that Dave King had said to me, that he was prepared to sell his shares to the right party. They could take the club forward. It wasn't just a question of selling to the first person that came forward. It's someone who can take the club forward as well. And there've been a couple of people that I think were well publicised who made inquiries. And bear in mind that Dave was the single largest shareholder. But it became quite clear. So I introduced him to Dave. They had some meetings, some calls, and then it became clear that Andrew and his colleagues wanted to get control of the club, i.e. more than 51%. So, which I wouldn't obviously get just by buying Dave's shares. So I at that point, I then introduced Andrew to the club, and I said, look, you need to speak to the board and the other shareholders to try and piece together this deal. And given the shareholding structure, which is quite fragmented, when we say 10 guys, that was quite a complicated deal, and that's why it took the best part of 7 months to get from that initial meeting in London to the completion of the deal.
Which, sorry, Dan.
No, go ahead. No, sorry.
I was going to say, because obviously we were in here discussing this as, we'd broken the story about
every night.
This takeover. We're talking about every night, but we were also conscious of the fact as the season was going on, it's taking longer than people expected for this to complete. And the longer it took, the more Rangers were behind the 8 ball for starting this season, which they've now started with Tuesday night's 2-0 win over Panathinaikos. But you do feel they're scrambling a little bit just now, don't you, Paul? It's kind of, I know it's early season, but there's so much work to do, and this is probably stuff in an ideal world the takeover would have been completed a couple of months earlier, and these building blocks could have been put down then, but they feel as if they're up against it from the start this season.
Yeah, obviously, you all these things, you want these things to be dealt with, you always want it dealt with quicker than actually happens. I know from, own involvement with Rangers and also other businesses. These things take time, unfortunately. You've got legal documents, you've got due diligence. I actually think it's a good thing it took 7 months because, in a funny kind of way, because basically they did extensive due diligence on the club, every aspect of the club, and therefore you like to think that they're going into this thing knowing they don't know everything, obviously, and they don't have the history, but they basically know, all the key things to know about the club. And I think it's a good thing. They're coming into this thing with, eyes wide open, having done extensive due diligence. And I think the fact that they did all that due diligence and still proceeded with the deal, that's a good thing. Mm-hmm. Now, if you ask me as a fan, would I prefer it to be done in February rather than May? Absolutely. But I mean, at the end of the day, this isn't going to be a kind of 12-month deal, and we'll see what happens. Obviously, we want a challenge for the title, and you need players to do that, and all that. We know all that stuff. But this is not a short-term project. So okay, it took a few months longer than expected, but in the grand scheme of things, it's more important. We've got the future foundations in place than a short-term, players here and there.
But you know better than anybody. Fans are impatient. They want,
of course,
they want success yesterday.
Yeah, and Rangers fans are like that, and I'm a fan. I'm the same. But what I would say to the fans is that, and this is a fan myself, please be patient. Give these guys time. There's going to be bumps in the road. I mean, you even saw it on Tuesday, and it was still in pre-season, basically. There's going to be bumps in the road. This will not be plain sailing. This will not be just, we've got these guys in, they've got a lot of money, it's going to go like that. That's not going to happen. It might happen. If it does, brilliant. But let's be realistic. It's going to take time. There's a whole reshaping of the squad, players in, players out. So it's going to take time, and there'll be difficult results along the way. But let's be patient. I think to me, this is a great deal for the club, and that's more important than the short term. Now, if we want to get the short term right as well, but to me, it's more important. We've got owners now in who I think can really add a lot of value. Big thanks to the guys that were there before, but this is now, a new era. So I think let's be patient if we can. I mean, I know patience is not always in great supply, but let's try and be patient.
The Rangers fans have waited 10 years to get to this point, so there's no point rushing.
Well, I mean, and I said before, I did think, and you can pull out the interview, I did think it would take 10 years, because you have to remember, I mean, I think, actually, I've spoken to John Gilligan about this quite a bit, and I've got a huge amount of respect for John, good friend of mine, and he was one of the other, key guys in the last 10 years. And John and I, we actually laughed quite a bit about the Cow and Beef thing, and how bad that was, and we never really told. I mean, we weren't trying to hide anything, but I think when we went in the Monday morning after the Friday and after Cow and Beef, just the extent to which the club had been broken was actually really distressing. I mean, you have no idea how bad it was, and I mean, we never really said how bad it actually was. So you've got a thing that had been
in what way? The finances,
everything,
the structure, the staff,
everything. So everything you need to run, let's call it an elite football club, sporting, any organisation, basically, frankly, it was absolutely broken in every single bit. There was nothing of it functioning, and at that time, it was basically John and I, and Dave was obviously there as well, but he was in South Africa, and then of course Stuart Robertson arrived, etc. But it was a really tough time. So I actually think to take it from that point, and also you're against a Celtic team in the widest sense that were flying high in the pitch, and also financially had all this advantage, and that was partly because we'd been demoted down the leagues, and obviously we'd had to come back. So I actually think to win, you obviously want to win every title and all the rest of it, but I think to within that 10-year period, and there's been lots of mistakes, and I was part of that. I made mistakes as well, but as I said before, football's not a guarantee. You don't come in and suddenly do things, and it's one of these things. What I would say was all well intentioned. The guys that were there were doing it for the right reasons. They put a lot of money in, as we said before. But so I actually think winning a title, and it's quite an important title, let's be honest, and getting to a European final, I think that's actually, in the context of everything else, that's not a bad achievement.
No, it's huge. Yeah.
If you just take a step back and just get a bit of perspective and a bit of context, I think that's actually quite impressive.
I know, I agree. There's just a couple of questions that I wanted to finish on because they're about football, believe it or not. And this one, Robert says, what was your favourite memory of being a Rangers supporter?
Whew, that's a big question, that, isn't it?
Put you in the spot.
Well, I mean, I said before, on a non-football. Well, there's probably two non-football ones, and I'm just searching my brain for a football one because there's so many of them. But I'll deal with the two non-football ones. So certainly, the 6th of March 2015, the EGM. I mean, that was, I mean, as emotional as it gets that day in terms of getting control of the club. That was, I mean, I think we'd all agree that was an amazing day. And the other one, which could have happened the same day, wasn't formalised the Monday, I think being appointed chairman of the club, albeit on an interim basis. For me, you know, as a fan, a wee boy coming from Paisley, to be actually chairman of the club was a massive source of pride for me. On a football, so I think there's so many games, isn't there? Memories. I mean, obviously, I think Nacho's penalty in Florence when we got to Manchester was unbelievable. In fact, that whole run was unbelievable, but certainly that was a big one. You know, there's obviously constant. There's so many cup finals and leagues. I think, you know, obviously Helicopter Sunday was incredible, and the aftermath of that was crazy. So yeah, I think those would be the memories. But I'm sure if I had more time, I could.
Yeah. I think, Paul, to be fair, any Rangers fan sitting out there watching this would think, yes, the day I was appointed chairman of Rangers would probably register.
I'd probably be up there.
Only lasted 3 months, but I just want to say another thing about the 49ers and Andrew, which I think is quite important, is that, you know, I think just to give them a looking at the future, you know, I actually think that there's a couple of quite important things. So, you know, to me, I haven't been involved in, well, I'm obviously a fan, but I haven't been involved inside the club for 20 years, you know, and obviously a lot of things happened in that period. But what is the number one priority in any football club, especially in today's world, is player recruitment. Player recruitment is absolutely front and centre of any plan you've got. And let's be honest, and I was part of it as well, you know, we've been pretty poor at that over a long period of time. So I actually really hope, this is probably talk about what these guys can add to the club. I really hope that Andrew and his group, you know, can bring the best people, the best technology which is now available, and best practice to really get player recruitment moving forward. I think that should be the number one priority. And I think we will learn from the 49ers and some of the stuff they're doing in the NFL. It's a different sport, but I think there's a lot of things that we can learn from that.
Same algorithms, data and all that.
Yeah, and it's not just data. Obviously, football is still played in grass, and you still need to have that human element. But there's no doubt that, you know, obviously adding the best, you know, we'll now get AI and all these different things. So I'm sure it's way above my pay grade, but I'm sure there's things that people can look at to help. So I think that player recruitment is, to me, the big thing we've got to get right. And you know, I think these guys can really help. And the second thing is that, you know, the 49ers are, you know, probably, you know, on the planet, one of the top sporting brands. So there's no doubt commercially that Rangers can really benefit from that association with a brand of that scale and value. So I think those two things, to me, are the things that hopefully Andrew and his team can really add to the club going forward. And with a bit of luck and, you know, the things you need to succeed, I think the future looks good.
The last question I have, and this, again, I feel bad putting you in the spot like this, but Ricky has written...
Don't.
No, I like to put Keith in the spot every night, so...
That's fine, that's fine.
Aye, that's all right. Aye. Ricky says, if Paul had been part of the Rangers hierarchy this summer, would he have lobbied to keep Barry Ferguson as first team manager for the long term?
Well, yeah, I mean, let me say a few things. So I think, first of all, get a huge amount of respect for Barry Ferguson as a player, as a guy, and as a manager. I mean, like most Rangers fans, I didn't see it coming when he was appointed. Well, obviously appointed on an interim basis. And you know, I actually messaged Barry the day when he kind of, well, that's the day when the season ended, just to say whatever happens. And at that point, obviously, I wasn't party to the management discussions, but whatever happens, you know, Barry Ferguson has done himself, you know, a massive service in terms of how he conducted himself, what he achieved. And bear in mind, he was a really impossible position. He's coming in, you know, and he's having to work with all the players that were there, couldn't really change it. But I think what he achieved, and that, now, there was obviously, again, bumps in the road, that's football, but, you know, the European run, the games against Celtic were really good, and I think but I'm not sure Barry's plans are in the future, but I think Barry has really, from a managerial point of view, has really let's say strengthened his CV, but I mean he's really given himself I think a platform to do that. With it. And you never know, life's a long game. I mean, Rangers might come back round again depending what happens. Yeah. So I think from all that point of view, I would say massive tick. I think the issue was, I'm not trying to dodge the question, but I think with new owners coming in, I think it was always a likelihood that they'd want to bring a new guy in, because obviously it's
their own man, kind of.
Well, not even just that. It's just the fact it's like a new era.
Clean slate.
A clean slate. You're bringing somebody else in. So I think, unfortunately, maybe Barry was. I mean, I suppose the interesting question would have been if let's say the takeover wasn't there, what would happen? Because obviously at that point in time, you then be faced with a different situation. But I think the fact that takeover was happening, I think unfortunately, Barry was caught up in that, because I just think I think certainly I always felt they'd want to bring in their own guy, and it's like a new era, clean slate, whatever you want to call it. But I think as as a guy, as a manager, I think Barry did a fantastic job.
Knocking out Jose Mourinho on that, at least. I mean, that's pretty
He
remarkable.
wasn't there long, but he did scalp Brendan Rodgers and Jose Mourinho, so he can be fairly satisfied with that.
I think I'm out of questions, Keith. I think we've grilled Paul for long enough.
Paul, we can't thank you enough, man. That's thoroughly enjoyed that. I'm sure that the people back home will have as well. And I think that the sort of overarching message from the whole thing is it's been a long haul for you. But I think you can probably now put your feet up a little bit, sit back, relax, and feel relaxed about it for the first time in 10, 15 years.
Yeah, I just want to go to games now and enjoy them.
Brilliant.
And I should say, for everyone watching, we'll be back on Sunday at 6 p.m. Thanks so much for all the questions today. We really appreciate it. And we hope you can join us then. Thanks for watching.